Kia ora. Welcome to this week's edition of Media Insider, the podcast. I'm Shane Curry, the New Zealand Herald Editor-at-Large, and this week I sit down with Bowen Pan, the founder of Facebook Marketplace and the Kiwi tech entrepreneur who's just returned to New Zealand after 13 years away in the United States. It's a wide-ranging conversation, and Bowen has just been appointed to the board of NZME, the owner of the New Zealand Herald, News Talk ZB, and property platform One Roof. He's got a lot of ideas and a lot of thinking around success for New Zealand business, particularly in the tech industry. Here's Bowen. Welcome to the Media Insider podcast.
Thank you.
Great to have you, and fresh, of course, from the US. 13 years in the US.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what you've recognised differently about New Zealand since returning.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Very, very glad to be here. So we've been away for 13 years. We left in, that would have been 2012. And I mentioned this before, that things have really massively changed, especially in the startup and tech industry. And when I left in 2012, I had just worked at TradeMe for just over 2 years. And when I looked around after that, there really wasn't that many tech companies to get excited about. I remembered, I think, Xero was very early. I think if I had the foresight, perhaps I could have joined Xero. But Xero essentially listed on the stock market to get venture capital money. It wasn't really a traditional public listing, so they were very, very small. But outside of that, there was essentially no venture capital industry. There was one or two firms like Movac that was playing that space, but they really had to cover the entire spectrum of investing, from very early stage to very late stage. No syndicate and no group to really go in with them, so they had to carry a lot of kind of market systemic risk. So it's very difficult. I think there was a group of Ice Angels. So there were just bits happening in the pockets, but really
nothing concerted
nothing concerted. No kind of real funding environment, and most companies didn't really go through the venture capital funding process and really try to build big, go global, hyperscale. So that was the environment that I left. And now coming back in 2025, it really is unrecognizable. And I think unrecognizable for a few elements. One is that there's a real funding environment here. I think that I would say to any founders and entrepreneurs that there isn't a lack of capital in New Zealand anymore.
Right.
I think for the longest time, we've always talked about how there wasn't enough capital. And I think that at least for seed stage, angel, and Series A, there is plenty of capital for the right companies. And there's a number of different VC firms being set up here. And I think thanks to also partly the government Elevate Fund that helped to bootstrap was a matching program to really attract quite a few VC firms, both abroad as well as native that has started. I think that's been a pretty massive shift.
Sure, and with that rise in capital has come the confidence as well amongst the local sector in terms of the people who are willing to risk themselves and to get their ideas flying.
I think the obviously capital is only one part, one leg of the ecosystem. And I think the other big leg, obviously having capital really helps. But the other really big piece I've noticed is that there's just been an ecosystem flywheel that's starting to turn, where you have multiple generations of startups coming through the ecosystem. So everyone knows the story of Hota coming from really the Rocket Lab folks, and you see quite a few folks coming out from a number of the LensaTech folks in the deep tech area, and several kind of incubation that came out, what essentially was able to generate companies like Tracksuit, et cetera, as well. And so that's also been really, really exciting when you see that these folks who have gotten their first experience in these other companies and really have seen how to build products. The likes of Hota and Tracksuit, that's really started from multiple generations of companies and founders supporting that ecosystem is really amazing. Another one is Aura, right? And Aura actually came through the ecosystem that I'm really close with from the University of Auckland Velocity ecosystem. They actually came runner-up in one of the business planning competitions here. And so it's really, I think that's really be amazing. And the other piece that I would say about these companies now is that not only are these companies world-class, because we used to always talk about creating world-class companies, that they can be created here. The fact that these companies are not just world-class, that they are really world-leading in what they do.
World-leading,
well, that's really exciting.
We've just seen Aura today being announced as the UK government wants to get Aura into the retail environment.
Yes.
In Britain.
Yes.
So fascinating developments over those 13 years, and of course, you returning to New Zealand and now hopefully, riding that wave yourself in terms of your own expertise, bringing that back and helping others.
Yeah, I think that's really part of the motivation is that I'm really excited to kind of, for both myself and my wife, is to transition more into the stage where it's more about contributing and helping and taking what we've learned and adapting what's useful to the New Zealand startup and tech context. And there's so much goodness in what's been happening here. And so I'm just excited to, help to accelerate and help the founders to think bigger and to push and build even more, and to tell talent from the rest of the world that New Zealand is a really great place to build companies. It's not just a place to do a 2 weeks tour. Right? It's a lot more than that, and I think that's really exciting.
One of the companies that you've been appointed to the board of course, is my own, and that's NZME, the owner of the New Zealand Herald and News Talk ZB, and many other media assets. Excited about that new role?
I am. Yeah.
So tell me your approach to it. You've obviously got an incredible background with the likes of Facebook, Stripe, Common Room. What do you bring to the company? What do you think the company saw in you?
I think that one of the biggest takeaways that I had during the conversation about possibly coming on the board is that companies like NZME have so much brand cachet and so much trust that it's built over many decades, and that's so valuable. But in order to really thrive in this world of where digital audiences exist not in paper anymore, there are still decent number in paper, but mostly online. The way the company needs to operate, the way it needs to think, how fast it needs to move, is just fundamentally quite different from a traditional media business that publishes newspapers.
I think I've seen you describe media companies now as basically digital audience companies.
Yes.
Is that a fair summation?
It is, yeah. And I think that's an important shift in that instead of thinking yourself as owning different media assets, you actually just appeal to different digital audiences, and you have different assets that can help to capture, i.e., to acquire those digital audiences. So like there might be some pieces that could be the front door, but then there's other pieces that could be other parts of the house, right? Like where you go through that can appeal to them for different uses, whether it is different content verticals or things like classifieds. That's also really important. That is a really important piece of building out this digital audience.
So you're talking about using some of the rich data that the company is collecting for its audiences in order to build other business models and potential revenue streams.
Yeah, it's getting data, but it's also getting the fact that there are, I think NZME is very good at getting people in the door, and a lot more can be done to keep them there. But keeping them there doesn't mean that you need to stay and just read more articles, but it also means that there's lots of other assets like OneRoof and others that you can actually build out to make it really useful for you, so that over time you actually start building habits where those other sites also become the front door, and you can habituate that. And that's kind of the exact same strategy and playbook that we saw as important that was run at Facebook, where the front door was a newsfeed, where people wanted to kill 2 or 3 minutes when they didn't know, like, they were trying to kill time, but once you're in, there are other ways that you can kind of build out intent and show how useful these other services might be, and that makes the whole asset much more valuable.
Well, of course, and one of the biggest examples of that, of course, is Marketplace. And you were the brains behind Marketplace, essentially, in terms of that coming to the fore at Facebook. Tell me a little bit about that and the extraordinary story behind how you identified the potential.
The TLDR is that it was very much a story of bottoms-up innovation, where the biggest strategies, and I think that's probably one of the biggest learnings personally for me, is that you can kind of strategize all you want and have a vision of where you want to go, but ultimately, especially I think in this business, is that it's shaped by what people do. It's shaped by user behavior, ultimately. And we'll talk about that later, but I think that point is actually a really important point as a mindset on, when there's a common narrative to say, wow, media companies are just destroyed by these tech platforms. But I would actually argue that on the surface, that's not untrue, right? Like, they clearly have taken advertising revenue. But if you peel a layer deeper, the media companies is actually disrupted by changing user behavior. That's actually the underlying thing, and the tech platform just captured it, and they built their entire company architecture around it, right?
Such as classifieds.
Such as classifieds, right? Yeah. So I think that's actually one of the biggest learnings, because Facebook had tried to do commerce many times before. There were many failed attempts, and every single one had been some sort of a strategy that people thought, this would be a really cool idea, let's try that, right? But the difference is that it was Marketplace that ultimately ended up being successful, was one where we actually looked at what people did.
This was in Indonesia, right?
This was Indonesia, where we saw people to say, well, we used it to buy and sell. Then you actually dig into, well, what they were doing, why they were doing it, to really understand, and to not misattribute why were people doing this. Were they doing this because Facebook was amazing and there was an amazing product, or were they doing this because they just love to buy and sell stuff, and there's just a lot of people on Facebook, so that's what they did, and it was very clear that it wasn't the former, because there was no product built for them, and the products that people use, like Facebook groups, was very suboptimal, and so really focusing on looking at that latent demand and that latent behavior was what ultimately unlocked, a billion-plus user-based product in the end that now is actually a really important driver of intent for the Facebook app. So I think that's one of the biggest learnings here.
Absolutely, because there's obviously been a lot of commentary over the last several decades about media missing the boat on several fronts. One of them is giving up the classified business very early on, thinking that the online would be a passing fad almost, that rivers of gold with the newspapers or the television networks and so forth. So there seemed to be a sort of a period of arrogance there, where the media companies sat back and let others eat their lunch, essentially. Do you think media are now back on track in terms of reclaiming some of that lost ground, or is there still a long way to go?
I think that there's, I think you can see lots of different pockets across the world where there's been very successful cases, where media companies have very successfully evolved themselves to become more of a digital audiences company, right? For example, Schibsted, they own very large media assets, but also very successful classifieds businesses that essentially fund a lot of the media side as well.
Have you studied Schibsted quite closely?
I know quite a few folks here, yeah.
Right.
And then there's also the Axel Springer is another example. So there's multiple examples where it's not rocket science. It's just being very deliberate and being very clear about where do you need to operate differently, and treating these different assets as actual products. Right, and not just as an extension or an add-on or another thing that shows more content. But if you treat it as a product and as a business to run in its own right. It's just requires a different mentality. And so I think there's been plenty of examples where it's been very successful. But there's also plenty more where, yes, if you're complacent and you think that the world will not change, then they have been really badly impacted. And I think that's perhaps one of the underlying attributes of the tech industry that is somewhat unique, which is that the decay curve of your competitiveness is very fast. And so tech companies are trained from birth to never be complacent, because if you are complacent, you die. And those who do become complacent are no longer here, right? And so, and this is ingrained so deeply in the ethos of Silicon Valley. You can actually see this literally in the physical environment. So a little story that people may not know is that if you go to the Facebook campus, and that's where people take their selfies with a thumbs up, and now it's like this Meta logo, but it used to be a thumbs up. Right. What people don't know is if they peer behind that logo, it's actually the Sun Microsystems logo. It's still there. Amazing. They just flipped it, and it's rusting away. And it's a constant daily reminder.
Purposely there.
It's purposely there.
Right.
That this amazing campus, all this thing that seems unmovable around us, can be gone in an instant if you become arrogant and you do not evolve and you do not move really quickly, you do not disrupt yourself, and be willing to take risks that make sense for your business, right?
Well, you witnessed that firsthand at Facebook, of course. Tell me about your experience there. We talked about the establishment of Marketplace, but what was the environment like? I guess you may have seen the recent book that Sarah Williams has written called Careless People, but was it anything like that? I mean, did you enjoy your time there?
Yeah, I think I was in a very different part of Facebook, so I deliberately focused on. I was naturally drawn to what's called 0 to 1, which is starting something reasonably small and reasonably new. I used to give advice to folks starting in a tech career that the best type of projects are low visibility, high impact projects. Yeah. Because you can have the freedom to really try and do things, but by the time you actually get to some level of success, the corporate antibodies won't get you, right? That you are sufficiently strong to withstand that. And so that's the type of projects I deliberately was drawn to. So as a result, I kind of stayed away from a lot of the perhaps a lot of the things that you may have read in those books, etc.
Have you read that book?
I'm through the book. Yeah, actually, the book is on a container, about to arrive. I think I'm up to like chapter 2 or 3.
So you can finish it. Yeah. What was Zuckerberg like? I mean, you've had meetings with Zuckerberg directly, right?
Yes. Yeah.
How did you find him?
I find him. I think Zuck is a very special founder and entrepreneur because there's very, very few founders that can scale like he does, as in scale himself. It's extraordinary for a person to be able to take an idea all the way to getting to product market fit, and then getting it to a stage where it's a real company, and then turning it into an incumbent that is consequential in history, right? And it's very, very rare for a single person to be able to scale themselves to do that. So I think that alone puts Zuck in a pretty rare kind of place. And if you look across all the tech giants today, Zuck is the only one left who is still a founder who is operating the company like a founder, right? And if you read a lot of commentary in the Valley, actually, that's very rare. It's very rare. And so that's one aspect that's I think doesn't get spoken enough about kind of one aspect of Zuck. I think the second aspect of Zuck is that I found Zuck to be really, really good at not considering sunk cost. And I think that is...
At not considering it.
Not considering sunk cost, yeah. And I think that's something that is very difficult to ignore on the amount that you've already put into something, right? And I've seen this again and again, where projects and products and ideas are assessed objectively in time, irrespective of what's being invested.
Right.
Because that's what you really need to do. And I think that...
And you've seen what at other places where the sunk cost can actually derail a project or
steer
it in a different direction.
The biggest implication of taking into account cost is that you just don't kill projects. You just live on. You just live on for sometimes forever. And that's actually very, very common. Very, very common. And I think that becomes really... it can become quite toxic for the company itself, because you start to accrue debt essentially, and it makes it harder for you to start new things. Just imagine if the population, if humans didn't die, society would look completely different.
Yes.
But that environment, I think, is if you don't kill off things that don't work, you're actually killing off new ideas. And I think that's another element that I think is perhaps one side of Zuck that is not often seen on the outside.
Interesting. Yeah. So just bringing the conversation back to big tech and media, and I know you've just returned to New Zealand, but in the local environment here, do you feel that the local media companies have been too focused on worrying about the impact of the big tech players rather than sort of focusing on their own initiatives and innovation and so forth?
Yeah. I like to say that regulation is not unimportant, but regulation is a rear view mirror. You can't drive forward by looking at the rear view mirror. You have to check sometimes to make sure that you don't crash and be aware of your surroundings and create an environment that's a little bit more of a level playing field. But it's not going to change the game. It's not going to decide your fate.
So the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill, for instance, and other legislation that they're looking at for the streamers, slightly separate, do you think any of that will actually work? Or, do you think it's feasible?
I don't have enough context on those. I haven't looked into those bills. But I think as a general point, it is always a better strategy to focus on how you can better serve your customers and your users and what they are actually doing, than to than anything else, really, at the end of the day, right? Because that's what pays the bills. And if your core audience is changing, if their behavior has fundamentally shifted and how they derive value has shifted, then you have to change, because then otherwise the only thing you're holding on to is nostalgia. There's something you can monetize from nostalgia, but not consistently. So that's kind of my general point of view for media.
Sure. So coming back to NZME, and obviously, it's now more than 5 years old, but One Roof has been a big focus in recent times. There's a review underway at the moment in terms of the future shape and what that might look like. What are your early impressions of One Roof now that you've sort of got your head under the bonnet?
Yeah, I think NZME has done a really, really great job of starting One Roof and actually building it to what it is today, which is essentially a really viable competitor to others in the market. I think a lot more can be done, for sure. I think it was done with essentially with the main part of the business still being the lion's share of the focus for a very long time, right? So I'm personally very excited. I still have to do the deep dives with the One Roof team, but based on everything that I've heard so far, I think there's a lot of potential to really build product experiences and a business that works really, really well for Kiwis. There's a lot of product experiences, I think, in the real estate market that has been lagging for a very long time in the New Zealand market, that is basically seen as standard across the world. And
such as? What kind of things?
Such as even simple things like the way that you should be browsing property. It's mobile experiences often feel like just transposing web, right, in many cases,
right.
Whereas they should really be mobile first. And experiences where to look at a property today, to piece together different pieces of information on that property, I often have. I mean, I just had this personal experience because we bought a property recently
Right.
in Auckland, and to check out any property, I often have to check three or four different sites
Yes.
for some pretty obvious information, like is this house in a flood zone? Is this what was the last council valuation of this place? Or like, what do you think the house is actually worth? Like, there's all these. It's all very
Information that could be collated into
Right.
a one-stop shop.
obvious. Right. Yeah. So I think those are tactical, almost cliche tried points. But the point is, I think there's a lot of opportunity to really drive better product experiences for the end user. And I think that there is also very always welcome addition for the supplier side, for the sellers and the agents to provide a great alternative to what it is out in the market today.
And then in the broader marketplace arena, obviously there's been some commentary around motoring and NZME partnering up with Gumtree. Do you see lots of potential there?
I think there's lots of other potential in other verticals. The traditional verticals are obviously real estate, cars, and jobs. That's right. Yeah. And so those are the three top ones. And I think jobs is actually pretty interesting as well, because obviously that's dominated by Seek. That's a foreign player, and TradeMe is in fact second in that. And motoring, I think motoring is also really interesting because there's a lot of I think motors is a really interesting space because there's actually a lot of content that's often associated with motors as well. That is more so than jobs, certainly more so than jobs and real estate, because there's certain car brands that people have affinity with, and there's actually a lot of kind of institutional knowledge that gets shared, and there's obviously a big fan base around certain following and everything else. And I think there's some interesting aspects there that's pretty underplayed, not just in New Zealand, I think globally as well. So I think there definitely are other opportunities that's worth exploring.
Yeah.
And I think that, but it's still early days. It doesn't mean that NZME should be launching any new vertical anytime soon per se. But I think the whole classified space is an exciting one in New Zealand.
Sure. And then how do you as a board member bring in or help foster that? Is it a startup mentality that you bring into a big corporate within the umbrella organisation that is NZME? How do you get that innovation and those ideas flowing and making sure that teams are like Facebook, that are developing new products with the customer in mind?
Yeah, I think the first step actually is to actually treat these different assets as actual standalone products in their own right and run them like products.
Kind of with their own P&Ls and things like that?
But also just in terms of how you measure success,
right.
How you think about, it's, for example, it's very common for media companies to think about to kind of group digital as just digital. Right?
That's right. That's right.
But that doesn't really make sense, because that's kind of just calling your...
It's quite amorphous, isn't it?
Well, that's just kind of saying core. Because digital is core, right? So what does that even mean? And so what you should actually be doing is have a really clear mobile strategy, have a really clear AI strategy, have a really clear video strategy, have a really clear, all these pieces are just like how you need a really clear content strategy. You need to have a really clear idea of where you invest in talent for the reporting. And the journalistic side of the business. Similarly, for these digital products, there's much more nuance in terms of how you think about the different pillars that actually drives the business and run them like proper digital businesses. And the cadence and speed just needs to be much, much faster, because that's what customers expect. There's just much less patience from end users when something doesn't work as much as they would like it to work, and the amount of patience they have before you improve your experience and they leave is much shorter.
Yes.
And so as a result, so it's not like, hey, you need to go fast for going fast sake, right? Because going fast also has other trade-offs, right? But
accuracy and making sure that the user experience is
yeah. But it's
beneficial.
actually demanded by end users. This is something that the end users want and need because that's how they behave today. And so I think that's the starting point. Is that I think more so than like, hey, I think it's easy to say, oh, like we need to be more innovative and have more of a startup mentality, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really hard to pin that down to what that actually means. But I think the starting point is that you need to be a lot more end user focused on what they actually want. Run these like standalone product companies, and really listen, have really clear feedback loops. And be able to iterate really quickly, and really focus on building out that growth loop really successfully. I think that's going to be really important as a first step.
AI, you mentioned AI in our conversation. Where can media, do you think, as a top line comment perhaps, where does media need to sort of focus itself with AI and all the possibilities that both gives us, but also perhaps challenges us as well?
Yeah, I think as a first point that AI presents a really amazing opportunity, and I think one of the things that is on the challenging side is that AI is rapidly changing user behavior. And we talked about, if you want to be user first, that's really the only way. And I think that's perhaps what's so dizzying about AI, is that the adoption of AI as a piece of technology, a lot of people talk about how AI feels different. AI feels different from other technologies. I think a lot of the core elements is not that different, but one thing that does feel different, that's somewhat underlying to all this, is that the speed and rate of adoption is very different. And the reason why it's so different is because the underlying conditions that's required for you to adopt doesn't predicate it on anything else, right? If you think about the rise of Web 2.0 and social, that's kind of predicated on smartphone adoption, right? And if you think about the Web 1.0, well, that's predicated on the internet being connected. And then before that, it was predicated on computers being in the home. But the difference in AI is that all the preconditions are there.
We have all the tools.
It's all there.
Platforms.
It's all there. So that's why this adoption is so dizzying, so fast, and this changing user behavior is happening so quickly. I think that's the part that feels, like speed is like change is hard. Really, really fast change is even harder. So I think that's kind of the nature of change with AI. That is how I would talk about it at a high level. I think that the good news is that fundamental human need doesn't change. I think that user behavior changes because you can just get to those needs faster and quicker in a way that satisfies them better. And there are still some things that people still will always want, which is they want to be entertained, they want to be informed, they want to feel like they're connected to the local community. And a lot of those pieces are still, I think, very uniquely provided by media companies, especially ones that's in smaller markets like New Zealand, where there's a very strong national identity and there's a lot of relevant regional subcontext that's very difficult for global companies. And so with that, I think it's really, really important for companies like NZME to embrace AI first and foremost, to apply it in its own products, to bolster and make it really, really helpful. Because right now AI tools are generalist tools. They're not really, they're kind of amazingly good at a lot of different things. But there's a lot of trade-offs and a lot of issues because it's a generalist tool. And there's a lot of things that you can do to leverage AI within the NZME portfolio of products that really is unfathomable before, to make it even better, right? So I think that's the first step. I think the second, which is really fascinating, and that's all around distribution and how much these LLMs are changing referral traffic distribution. I think that's changing really, really quickly. And I think this space is evolving very, very quickly. So no one really knows where the answer is and where things will land ultimately. But I think the important thing is that that companies like NZME has the capabilities to rapidly experiment and learn, and so that it's not caught in a blind spot. And I think that we're doing a lot of that today. We're keeping a really close pulse on these, and then really key is really evolving your strategy very quickly based on the data, and not hoping that you will have a silver bullet strategy that can be amazing and doesn't change for the next even 12 months. So I think that's how I would think about AI.
And I want to conclude a fascinating conversation today, Bowen, but just bringing it back to New Zealand. As we say, you've returned now after more than a decade away, 13 years away. Where do you see the future of the country heading in terms of, our tech sector? For so long we've relied on traditional exports and so forth, but do you see, where do you see the country heading?
Yeah. Well, obviously agriculture and farming and commodities is an extremely important part of the economy. And I think still to this day, it is the lion's share of our exports. And I think that for moving forward, kind of regardless of whatever sector, the most important thing I think to think about for our economy is where do we have leverage, and where do you create unfair advantage to really build great businesses to then bring wealth back into the country. And I think a lot of that historically has been agriculture, and it's also not zero sum, right? There's lots of technology that actually makes our agriculture industry better, and also some technologies that exist because of our agriculture sector. Like there's no better example than Halter, right? And then so I don't think it's a zero sum thing per se, and I also think that the early but very, very promising set of companies that are kind of coming out in addition to Halter, like what we talked about, the Auras of the world, the Tracksuit of the world, Partly, etc., are really, really amazing, because the acid test there is that can I, on good conscience, talk to a mid-level engineer in Silicon Valley working in a startup and say, hey, if you want a lifestyle change, come and work at one of the companies in New Zealand, and the upside working there is just as good, if not better, than any company you'll find in Silicon Valley. Can I do that? The answer is yes.
Wow. So the settings are in place.
The answer is yes. Yeah, the answer is yes. There's not a ton of them, but it's yes for actually a decent number of companies, right? Like half a dozen, if not more.
Yeah. And do you see that number increasing?
Yes.
Are the settings here to be able to do that now?
Yes. And I think that hey, if we don't do anything, I think the ecosystem will, over time, like the flywheel will just keep churning, and I think it will grow. I obviously, I'm a big believer that if you see something that is working for a small country like us, one of our unique advantage is that we can put more wood behind the arrow and really create a better environment for those type of companies. I think the government has done amazing work to start to kind of bootstrap some of the funding environment, but there's a lot more that I think we could do to really help to push this, and it's all about acceleration. But either way, I think this tech sector, the startup sector, is incredibly exciting, and I think it's a story that I think as a whole is offers, I think, a lot of hope. I hope for folks who are right now in the macro environment, it's pretty tough, right? But the silver lining is that the best companies are always built in the toughest environments, and I think that's what we're seeing with these new crop of companies.
Thanks, Bowen. A fascinating interview and food for thought for all of us. Don't miss the Media Insider podcast every Thursday, wherever you get your podcasts, and the weekly Media Insider column at nzherald.co.nz every Friday. I'll catch you next week.